Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema Podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com, as well as the Sonic Cinema Podcast YouTube channel. You can also check out the podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, Good Pods. Pretty much wherever you want to listen to podcasts is available. In addition to the regular podcasts and the interviews on the YouTube channel, you also get the occasional quick take review of movies that I may not necessarily have a lot to say in written form, but I do want to put my words out there. So that's at the Sonic Cinema Podcast YouTube channel. You can also check us out at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. You'll get early access to reviews, exclusive content, including a series that I'm doing called Leaving the Collection, which basically I look at a movie that I've had in my collection for a while, and I watch it one more time and basically give my thoughts on it and sort of why it's leaving the collection at this point. And that is at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. So we are continuing our discussion of horror on the podcast, and I am so thrilled to be joined by a podcaster, filmmaker, former film critic. You know him from a lot of different things, 80s all over. His current podcast, Overhated, Science versus Fiction. I'm pleased to be joined by Scott Weinberg. Scott, thank you very much for joining me.
You are very welcome, Brian. Thank you for the invite.
So the first question I had is what is it that got you into movies when you first started to realize you were falling in love with movies?
Oh, that's an easy question. I know lots of people, when it comes to something like that, you can never pin it down, but I can kind of pin it down. It was early 80s, and my dad came home with something, a big bag or box from the store, and we all went down into the basement and I was positive that it was an Atari. Because that was hot at the moment, and when I was a 9-year-old, 10-year-old kid, that's what I wanted, an Atari. Mm-hmm. Now that I look back on this memory, my brain's like, why would your father, knowing what you know about him, why would he buy an Atari, and why would he come home excited about it? My mother would have done that, knowing that my sister and I would have flipped out, but my father wouldn't have thought that. Mm-hmm. My father was not great with gifts. My mom was the gift giver. But it wasn't it was a Betamax. And my dad's explaining how you could record shows off TV and watch it later, and you could rent movies from the store. And my sister and I were intrigued, but certainly not enthused. And I would say within 6 months, I was just obsessed with watching as many movies as I could. Mm-hmm. My dad had mentioned in passing, my dad was a firefighter, and he mentioned in passing that they had rented, among other horror films, The Thing and Alien. And I don't know if they watched those together but it was definitely brought up in the same conversation. Mm-hmm. And towards the end of the conversation, I remember saying to my dad, well, how were the movies? And he paused and he went, not for you. And within a week, both, I had finagled my way to see them. And I think I saw them at 11 or 12. And that was it. I was hooked. That was when Alien and The Thing. Those are the two. I mean, I was a movie nerd before that. Obviously, if you get to stay up late to watch The Wizard of Oz, you like The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
So, I think parents psychologically build that love into their kids by making movies a special occasion. And then kids grow up loving movies because of that. And my grandmother used to record horror movies for me off HBO, and I was allowed to go see most movies. My parents knew that I was obsessed with movies, and I was, not just for something to avoid work and schoolwork, but it was like, I was into the even more than video games for a while. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's pretty much early 80s. It was easy to become a movie nerd.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a bit younger than you are, but I mean, I certainly remember that feeling of watching some of these movies come out. The Star Wars, the Raiders of Lost Arks, the Ghostbusters, the Jaws, and all of that. Yeah. Well, and my mom showed me Jaws at a certain point, and I watched some of the older movies at some point.
Everybody
you just get in
has a
love with
story
it.
like this. Either at a sleepover, or their mom took them to a movie, or their dad bought them a DVD, or just it could be any one of 1,000 different anecdotes, but it's always boils down to the same thing. I was at a lonely place. I was bored. I was unhappy. And I found something in the artistry of movies that made me feel better. Whether it's just something to take up the time for 90 minutes or something that can reassure me about something in life or can make me feel good, laugh, scream, cry. I wasn't able to have articulated this at 12 years old, but movies are a great outlet for kids. They really are, because kids can't always articulate what makes them happy and what makes them sad, but they can recognize it in a movie.
Yeah.
So I it's like the great Roger Ebert said, movies are empathy machines, and I believe that.
I was actually just thinking of that quote before you put it out there. And it's absolutely true. I mean, especially when you are at that point where it's hard to say exactly how you're feeling. And I mean, I got there a bit later in life, but at the same time, once a movie clicked with me, it clicked with me. And one of the things that I think a lot of people identify you with in particular was horror. You already mentioned Alien and The Thing, which are two tremendous examples of the genre. What was it about horror specifically that drew you to it?
That's a great question. Well, I think it's colorful. I mean, like in some cases, it's very dark and adult. But in many cases, horror is fun. It's colorful. It plays like a fun house in a carnival. The posters are scary, scary, but not that scary because they're in a newspaper. And, it's all artifice, but it's trying. Every single horror movie is like, this one will scare the hell out of you. But like with that underlying knowledge of everybody accepts it, that it's all completely fake. So you can say as horrifying and as realistic and as terrifying, you could say it all you want, but deep down we all know it's just a show. And that's part of it's like why people like professional wrestling. It's the same reason that people like horror movies. Nobody ever looks at a horror fan and goes, horror movies are fake, Yeah, we know. They're not fake. It's called fiction.
Yeah.
And so it's like it's kind of the same thing. You're willing to buy into the fiction. And it's the same with like traditional soap operas, professional wrestling, Star Wars, Harry Potter books. Anything that goes on and on. It really captures our attention.
Yeah. And I think one of the things in particular about horror, I love the way you put it as far as it being like a carnival and just having all of these different things that it's capable of doing. And I definitely have come to appreciate that more and more as I've really started to dive into. And of course,
some horror movies are about serious things.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that like not every horror movie is a carnival ride. Some are about, very serious and disturbing and upsetting things like, death and suicide. And, horror is a beautiful thing. And that a lot of times it is fun escapism, but it can also get across painful and difficult messages that other genres can't do quite as well. I always point to Cronenberg's The Fly as a movie that like talks about, people call it an AIDS parable, but he I believe has said more than once it was just meant to represent somebody living with a dying relative. Could be AIDS, could be cancer, could be anything. And that movie is so poignant and touching and brutal and honest in a way that I think a lot of genres can't be, because it would just, if it was a drama, it would be too push button and too manipulative. If it was a comedy, it would be tasteless. But in a horror film, you can really make your point in a gruesome, powerful way. It also helps to have really good artists in charge of the film.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you're getting at there, the three movies we're going to be talking about today, I think are really excellent examples of that. And, I remember as a kid, it's like one of the few horror movies I really watched and really enjoyed was Creepshow. And that's one of those that's just so much fun. George Romero, Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, but in Stephen King, more serious horror as well. But at the same time, it's like the fact that those two came together and did something that was just, in a way, very wacky and very fun within the genre is really special. And the fact that they were able to branch out of their usual comfort zones to do that is really unique and enlightening.
Creepshow is a great gateway. Sorry, I pick up. Creepshow is a gate. I'm going to try this one more time. I'm trying to say great gateway. There we go. Creepshow is a great gateway horror film because, obviously, like you said, a lot of these old EC-inspired horror stories, they're morality tales. They're, if you look at it, the stories are, don't be a rotten wife to your miserable husband, and don't cheat on your spouse, and don't abuse your elderly mother for her money. Like, they're all these simple morality tales that are taken from the old EC comic style, and they are kind of modernized. And I think that Creepshow is a masterpiece. I'm not kidding. I think that remember when Rodriguez and Tarantino made a big hullabaloo about making Grindhouse?
Yeah,
that's what Creepshow was, the first Grindhouse.
Yeah,
a movie like admiring and emulating the stuff that it saw 40, 30 years ago. But it didn't have to advertise that it was like a Grindhouse. It was just, here we go. Mm-hmm. Here's something that we all know and love. And I mean, there's a reason that Creepshow, whenever people talk about anthology horror, Creepshow is the godfather.
Yeah.
They're not the first. It's certainly not the first. Amicus made 7 of them, and some of them are damn good. But I still think that when you talk about anthology horror, Vault of Horror and Tales from the Crypt, yes, Asylum might be my personal favorite of all time, even more than Creepshow. But yeah, that's the movie people point to when they say, I love anthologies. Creepshow is the great granddaddy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. What is it, so we'll go ahead and get into the 3 films that we're going to be talking about here. And the theme that I gave you when I brought this up was sort of under the radar horror films. And it's funny because of the fact that the 3 films that it's funny, I don't necessarily consider these under the radar specifically, but I think outside of film fans and outside of genre fans, I definitely think they are, because of the fact that they're not The Thing and Creepshow and Alien and names that people are necessarily going to remember. What was it about these 3 specifically that inspired you to suggest them?
Well, I think it's because, like you said, they're not wide release horror films. They all got decent, well, except one. They got decent releases, but they're smaller films. Horror fans will be like, you think these are obscure? No, they're not obscure. But in the mainstream realm, they are definitely underappreciated or overlooked. Or dare I say, overhated? No. May deserve to be a hit. Lionsgate released it in a horrible test screening pattern and dumped it. And it's a masterpiece. I have gone on to become good friends with the director, Mr. Lucky McKee, who is a wildly talented guy. And I will always use May as a good example of under the radar horror. Every horror fan by now has seen it, but I still push it. And for some reason, I've always paired it up with the brilliant haunted asylum story, Session 9, and the bizarre horror Western dark comedy called Ravenous. Mm-hmm. And whenever people have asked me on Twitter or Facebook or whatever have you, can you name some underrated horror movies or under the radar or underseen? For years, from like 2000 or so on, those are the 3 I've thrown out. I have new additions recently, other than that. But for some reason, I've always paired those 3 together: May, Session 9, and Frailty. And then, May, Session 9. What did I say?
Ravenous.
Frailty was number 4. If you're listening to this episode, add that one to your list too. Bill Paxton's Frailty. Boy, yeah, that's a great horror movie.
Well, I mean, and we are definitely going to get into it. And I'm looking forward to that conversation because I've been a big fan of that one since I saw it in theaters. We are going to start with Brad Anderson's Session 9. And it's funny because of the fact that this movie's been on my brain for so long, I could have sworn at some point I had seen it. And as I was getting ready to prepare for this episode, it occurred to me, oh wait, I haven't seen this. So this was actually my first watch, and
but you had seen the David Caruso GIF.
I don't know that I had seen the GIF. I mean, I've seen other ones. The
wonderful GIF of
but...
David Caruso going, "Fuck you."
No, I don't know that I had seen that, but it's funny because of the fact that Brad Anderson, for me, for a long time, the movie I would point to from him was actually a movie he did a couple of years before called Next Stop Wonderland, which is a delightful little romantic comedy with Hope Davis. I saw that. I thought it was wonderful. I absolutely loved the soundtrack to that. It was terrific. And then after Session 9, he's basically associated with horror and genre. And so Session 9 is about an asbestos cleaning crew that are working in an abandoned mental hospital with a horrific past. And this actually really, as soon as we have this, the establishment of the mental hospital and them walking through the hospital for the first time, the movie that I couldn't stop but think about was my favorite horror movie of all time, which is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, and the introduction of the Torrances to the Overlook Hotel.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. When they're first introduced tour around this dilapidated, broken down building. I never put that together, but I guess that does make sense that he is the quote unquote tour he's getting is not dissimilar to the opening in The Shining. But that's obviously that's the beauty of good art, is that like I watched this movie probably 7 times. I don't think I thought of The Shining once. You see it once or twice and you're like, oh, that's The Shining. I see that. And like both are legit. That's what art is,
Yeah. When did you first watch Session 9?
Oh gosh, Session 9. I hate to say it. I want to say I wish I could say I saw it at a festival and I championed it, but I didn't see it theatrically. I saw it when it first hit home video, and I went nuts for it. And yeah, a lot of these films I've supported. But yeah, this one I did not get to until later. I went on a whole rigmarole to see it in theaters. We'll get to that in a bit.
Yeah.
But no, Session 9 I did not see until it was on video. And I became a Brad Anderson fan instantly. And then after that, he did The Machinist, which is great. He did the Trans-Siberian, which is a fun train thriller. And I'm a Brad Anderson fan. I'm always curious. I'm always excited to see what he has next.
Mm-hmm. No, and the thing that I love about this one is it's essentially a haunted house movie in a lot of ways, because of the fact that you're dealing with this mental hospital with a past, and a terrible past, and you have one of the workers and the crew who are listening to session tapes from one of the patients. But you also have this double aspect of the haunted house where it's not just the supernatural aspect of the house, the hospital.
It's almost like a side dish, isn't it? It's Peter Mullen. Peter Mullen is dealing with some kind of horrible trauma in his life, and we keep cutting away to him trying to reconcile with his wife. He did something terrible, and we're trying to figure out what it is. And it's obviously it's an essential aspect of the movie, but even without that aspect, it's a fun haunted house or haunted asylum movie. But then that adds, I think, a real interesting layer of humanity and sadness to the scary story.
Oh, absolutely. And but the thing that's also kind of interesting is that not only do you have the haunted house aspect, but you also have the fact that it's like they're working in a situation where if they're not careful, they could potentially die because of because of everything that they're taking in during this process. And to me, that really adds another dimension to that aspect that is really kind of fascinating, and it's something that they acknowledge, but it really is more of the psychological aspects that come in. You're like you said with the Peter Mullen character, and then David Caruso and Josh Lucas, their love, their hate relationship with one another, and
a great performance by Brandon Sexton III as an obnoxious kid who you still somehow care about just a little.
Yeah.
Like in most movies, you'd hate this character.
Mm-hmm.
Like just hate him, like pure hate. But in this movie, he's obnoxious and flawed, but he has a moment towards his character's end in a hallway underground that is one of the scariest things I saw in years. It is so creepy.
Yeah, and this movie does a lot with this. This is a great example of a movie. It does a lot with a little because of the fact that they filmed at Danvers Asylum, which Anderson had driven by on a regular basis, and I guess they were only allowed to use like 3 sections of the asylum, in order to film it, and because everything else was just it was not safe for them. But I love the fact that this works with a lot of the use of shadows, the use of sound design, whether it's the score or just sound effects in general. This hits a lot of different buttons with me as far as what I love about scary movies.
You know what I love in setting like this? I love like the depth of field. I like a deep hallway where you can see all the way down and all the little details. Like I don't, sometimes you like the whole point of somebody shooting a shot of looking down a hallway is that we've all looked down a very dark, empty hallway and thought, I don't want to go down there. Mm-hmm. In order for that to work, it has to be somewhat realistic, and we have to be able to see it. It can't just be like 6 feet and then a blurry haze. And the cinematography in this movie is fantastic. It's by Uda Bryce-Witz. I want to get that right.
And this was one of the first films to use Sony's HD cameras. And I love the look of this film. It's just rough enough to where it has that low budget feel to it that a lot of really great low budget horror movies have. But it also has this kind of unusual sheen that's almost otherworldly in a lot of ways, especially when you're talking about that depth of field down hallways, and especially when Mullen is his character is looking at that big room that has that just single chair sitting in the middle of it. Yeah. It's just absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, and you kind of just get the idea of like the Danvers or the hospital as it's named in the film is just, even though I love the idea of like even people who don't believe in ghosts could be in a building like that and be like, yeah, there's something here. It's a negative vibe. It's an unpleasantness. It's so much misery piled upon misery. And, some people would roll their eyes at any of that. But I think that it's the idea of there being like, not a ghost like, ooh, chasing you down a hallway, but like the entire location being malevolent. Yeah.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, it's like I'm absolutely with you. I mean, I know the theater I used to work at before it closed, like our projection booth, there was one section down it where like it was very, minimally lit. So it's like, even though I've been down that hallway dozens upon dozens of times, it's like, yeah, that still creeps me out. You still
could live in the same house for 50 years and still be creeped out by a dark hallway. That's just primal, like human beings are, we are innately afraid of walking down some dark path with lots of, dangers. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Yeah. One of the things it's really fun in this one, I mentioned the music and the sound design earlier. They also use the session tapes on the soundtrack. I think the way those are used to sort of show the way the mindsets of these characters are going downhill, I think is always it's an interesting use of not only exposition for the history of the location, but also a way of putting us giving us another look at the way that these characters are going downhill.
It's a great point. It's a great point that shows you that Brad Anderson is a good writer, because he found a way to get a lot of exposition into scenes that are fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times exposition is, it's like, required heavy lifting in the first act. You have to tell the audience certain things. And the key is, can you tell the audience certain things in an artful, clever, subtle, creative way without being like, we are now in this building to clean up the asbestos and look at all the, it's really hard to like tell the audience stuff. When I'm telling you a horror story, I can go back, and the place was completely broken down and every hallway was, and you're like, but when you're telling a horror story, you need to get that data out. And yeah, it's a fascinating way to explain what happened in this facility. Also, as any horror fan will tell you, Session 9 refers to this whole series that the Peter Mullen character is listening to a bunch of sessions, psychological, what would you call it?
I would psychological. I would say, oh God, and
interview.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably the best way I can think to put it right now. Yeah, I mean, they're basically psychiatric sessions, is what they are, and basically of a psychiatrist talking to this one patient who happens to have multiple personalities, and the thing that's really kind of the thing that's really kind of interesting to me is you would think in another movie somebody would try to manifest like that idea of multiple personalities and stuff like that.
Yes,
but
yeah, I agree. In a less confident filmmaker's hands, they'd be like, we need an actual monster.
Yeah,
like we need a physical something, because there's not a physical something in this movie. It's all how it affects the men working there and the history of the place. And if there had been like a monster, I love monsters, but man, that would have hurt the movie.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the place is enough to scare you, to terrify you, and to be working on these characters. And I love the fact that at a certain point you really start to wonder how much is real that we're actually seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, did Josh Lucas's character really go to Miami, or did he just get lost? And if he didn't go to Miami, well, why did Caruso's ex say they went to Miami? It's one of those things where it's like you, like the characters, you start to lose your grip on reality of the movie, but at the same time, that's when the movie really continues to build to when the truth is ultimately revealed about Mullen's character. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is. And it's a weird analysis, because what he's done should make us not like him at all. But the film takes the approach from the beginning of, this is a guy who's done something terrible and he feels he's broken. He literally he destroyed himself because of something that he's done.
Yeah.
And he's not a good guy, but he's still a human being.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's where empathy in a horror film comes from. A character does not have to necessarily be likable, but they do need to be relatable in some way.
And I think that's one of the things we're going to see throughout these three films, is that is the key point, where it's like, even if the character is not doing something that we morally agree with, we still sympathize with that character. We still empathize with what they're going through and what they have been going through. And
exactly. That the young character is pretty damn obnoxious, and we still feel bad for him when he is terrified.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you haven't had a chance to see this, unfortunately, I don't know if it's streaming anywhere right now on one of the streaming channels. It should be. I mean, it should be.
Hold on, I'll check for you, but go ahead, keep going.
But I mean, even if you do have to pay to rent, it's well worth paying to rent.
Yeah, it's not. It looks like it's not streaming anywhere right now, but obviously it is available to rent or buy from all the standard, YouTube, Google, Apple,
Yeah,
and Amazon. $4 to rent it. It's worth it.
It's absolutely worth it. And it was really great to discover that one. I actually watched it yesterday, and I also watched our next movie that we're going to talk about yesterday. This isn't the first time watch. I've seen this a few times over the years, and that is Bill Paxton's Frailty, which came out in 2002. I did see this one in theaters. When did you see this one?
This one I did see at a press screening, and believe it or not, I took my mother.
Oh, wow.
to see Frailty, and I did not. I knew it was going to be a religious thriller, but I did not know it was going to be quite so gut punch disturbing.
Yeah,
because the message that it leaves with is a really challenging, difficult, excellent.
It really is. Yeah.
As far as writing is concerned, if you're religious, I could see you hating this movie.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it's an indictment of organized religion, and I love it. I love it.
It's funny. I actually watched this one with my mother too, and we were both big fans of this actually. So this is if you haven't watched it, this is I've always been a fan of this one since I first saw it in theaters. It's about a man who comes to an FBI agent in his office and tells him that he knows who what is known as the God's Hand Killer is, and that's his brother. The man in question is played by Matthew McConaughey. The FBI agent is played by Powers Booth, and we start to hear from McConaughey about his childhood with his brother Adam and his father, played by Bill Paxton. And his father comes with a vision to the boys and says that God has told me that there are demons in the world, that demons are real, that demons exist, and it's our job to kill them. And we see the way that unfolds. And, it's funny. It's been a few years since I'd watched this, and one of the things that the flashbacks take place in the late 70s, and that was around the time you're starting to see Satanic Panic come into play. And one of the things that really struck me is how, unfortunately, tragically, some of these ideas and some of these tragedies are starting to come through again because of conspiracy theories and all of these weird different conspiracy theories. Like, there are demons. There's, good versus evil, and it really is it is definitely a damning look at religious extremism, but it is a powerful psychological thriller because of the fact that you do kind of wonder how much of what McConaughey is saying. You wonder why he's saying all of this at the time. And
what's interesting to me is that Frailty and Session 9 kind of have a similar theme in that not only do we have an unreliable lead character or narrator, but as it turns out, if we knew the whole story, we would hate that lead character. We would, if you were told from the aftermath and then told the backstory of what the Bill Paxton character did involving his sons, your first and normal reaction would be, he's a monster. But because it's so well written, Brett Hanley wrote this script, because it's so well written, it actually tricks you into feeling empathy for someone who you should not feel sympathy or empathy for this man, for what he's doing and putting his kids through. But it's that I think that's part of the reason that people rarely even talk about it. It is a disturbing concept of not only an adult convincing their child to kill someone, but what goes on in the third act of the movie. I'm just impressed that the movie even got made, frankly.
It really is. It really is impressive. I mean, maybe I would imagine this is one of those movies where Bill Paxton probably would not have been able to get this made as a director unless he agreed to act in it. Even though, I mean, he was clearly able to get McConaughey in there. But the fact is, it's like Paxton being such an endearingly enjoyable presence on screen is such a huge benefit to this movie because of the fact that when he tells you, oh, they're demon, the Lord spoke to me and they're demons, you believe that he believes in. That's the most important thing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. If he comes off as like wild-eyed or loony in the early parts of this movie, it falls apart. He has to be convincing. He has to be earnest, or it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And Paxton is amazing. And I don't know if part of the allure of this was he just loved the script and also saw a great role for himself, or I don't know what his motivation was behind this particular project. But man, I think it's a masterpiece. I truly think Frailty is a masterpiece.
Yeah, I definitely love it more now than arguably I ever have before, and I've always been a big fan of it. McConaughey is such a great narrator. This is really like an unheralded performance of his.
It is. Powers Booth also fantastic in this movie, by the way. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. But
as the cop.
Yeah. McConaughey as the narrator, the use of his, I think this is one of those cases where his accent makes a huge amount of difference because of, and it's kind of the same thing that Paxton has in his performance, where as soon as you hear him talk about this, you just believe it.
Right. And the kids are great too. It's really a difficult balance because when you're dealing with kids in a movie and they have this much to do, you really run the risk of, kids, I hate to be a Grinch, but bad kid performances can be annoying. So I don't blame the kid. No ill will towards any child. Mm-hmm. But if a kid's performance is not good, it can sink a movie like few things can sink a movie. And the two young kids and the two sons in this movie are freaking great.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially Jeremy Sumpter's young Adam, I think Matt O'Leary as Fenton is really good. There's something about Sumpter's Adam though that really connected with me this time, and the fact that I think it's because of the fact that he's just so blindly willing to go along with his father. It's like, what does that say about him? And but the thing is, you believe that he believes it. And it's just such a performance. And the fact that he gets so far into it, it really shows you how impressionable kids can be and just how dangerous the idea of radicalization can be. And I mean, this is, it's one of those things where it's like so many people talk about, radicalization of kids. It's when it's like, this is the type of thing that if you tell a kid this, unfortunately, they might believe it. It's like, not every kid is necessarily going to be Fenton in this case.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I just looking over at Wikipedia. Roger Ebert gave this movie 4 stars. I remember that now.
Yeah.
God love him, Roger Ebert was sometimes pretty difficult or pretty rough on horror movies. Mm-hmm. So when he gave something 4 stars, you took note. And I think this he didn't help. The movie didn't even break $18,000 at the box office. Or no, 18 million. What did I say?
18,000. But I mean, either way, it was not as successful as it should have been. I mean, and talking about Paxton's direction, it's like so much of it is centered on the characters, so much of it is centered on the actors, but the ways that he uses light to play up the religious angle of when he's spoken to is just, it's so subtle. Like, and we sort of talked about with Session 9, it's like a lesser director would have done more to try and make this like really big and broad, and you will actually seen an angel and stuff like that to a certain extent, and the way that the effects are done here is just really impressive.
Yeah, and it really, what I like the most about Session 9 is that if you're really into it and you're paying attention, afterwards, there's lots of things that you can chat about, like, wait, so that means that all along, yup, he and the boys, yeah, and it's like, it's upsetting. It's a disturbing movie to talk about. I don't want to spoil it for those who haven't seen it, but it is, it's disturbing in a very intelligent way. Let's put it that way.
Oh yeah, and I mean, I'd remembered one of the twists, but I had forgotten one of the other twists. And this ending, because I don't want to spoil it either, because if you haven't seen this, you deserve to experience that twist yourself in the film. But I will admit, like, when one of the twists happens, it's like, well, how do I feel about that now, thinking about like what we have seen or what we haven't seen in the film, in terms of what Paxton has shown us as, they've been going through this situation. Because one of the things that we get a sense for is that he feels like he can see the sins that these people have done. And
I mean, it's essentially, if a guy says to you, I see demons, every ninth person I see is a demon.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, okay, that you're unhinged. But then you think, well, what would happen if somebody would go home and repeat that to their two young sons?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you would hope that, normalcy would intervene at some point. But what if the boys just believe their dad? And then it further extrapolates, what if the dad is right? And then of course there's the hacky sack back and forth of, is it real? Is it not? Is it real? Is it not? And that ambiguity, and good, well-written ambiguity is like a compliment to the viewer. Mm-hmm. It's like saying, any one answer I give, even if it's a fun answer, is not going to be satisfying. It's more satisfying if I take you halfway through an ending and let you fill in the blanks for the rest and talk about it. And I think both of the movies that we've talked about so far do that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I did want to give love to Brian Tyler's score for this. It from the very beginning, over the images and credits, it really sets the tone for this movie. This is, I do think this is one of his best scores. I mean, he's done some really solid scores over the years. He's somebody who, and I know around this time he also did Bubba Hotep, which I absolutely adore that score. But he's really an underrated genre films composer.
Yeah, we also want to throw some love towards the great Bill Butler, still cooking at 101 years old.
Yeah,
he shot Jaws. He shot The Conversation. He's amazing. He shot Rocky 2. He didn't shoot the first one. And Bill Butler shows that all you need is a world-class cinematographer to make your horror movie 10 times better. That's all you need.
Yeah, and this
movie looks like $1 million, and it didn't cost. It cost $11 million. This movie looks like it cost more than that. Yeah.
No, it's absolutely fantastic, and I've been a big fan of it since 2002. I may be even more of a fan of it now, having watched it this most recent time. It gets under your skin, and I mean that's one of the things that's one of the things that great horror can do, is that, but not in a way that makes you feel unsettled, but also in a way that makes you think about how you react to the world. And I think that's something that's always really good to remember when it comes to horror.
Yeah, I mean, like, if the only message that you take from Frailty is there are two sides to every story, then that, that's enough. But it's such a, it's such a fascinating movie because it preys on your expectations and what you think, and it knows what you're going to think about these things, and then turns it on its head in Act 3. I don't want to accidentally spoil anything, but if you have not seen Frailty, do yourself a favor. Hold on, let me check where it's screening, where you can, if it's streaming anywhere.
Looks like it's on AMC Plus. Looks like it might be on AMC Plus.
Okay. HBO Max has it if you're an HBO subscriber. But yeah, otherwise, same deal. $4, rent it anywhere. But you will not be sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or it looks like it's on sale to buy for $8, which means watch it twice and it's paid for itself. And you will watch it every Halloween, I think.
Yeah, honestly, just probably put down the $8 to buy it because of the fact that it's completely worth it. I've had my collection since 2002, and I always whenever I take it back out, I'm always reminded of how great it is. And that was definitely the case when I rewatched the last film that we're going to be talking about tonight, which is Lucky McKee's May. And
okay, I did before. Can I interrupt real quick?
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
made the mistake. I thought, because it is one of my standbys, I thought for some reason we were also covering Antonia Bird's Ravenous, which I just have to throw in a plug for. It is a bizarre Western action about has action, horror, thriller, and it's about people at an isolated camp who start to believe in some Native American customs that the Wendigo, if you eat your enemy, it will make you stronger, and people start going insane. And it has some great performances, great music, and I just want to throw in a plug for Ravenous. Have you seen that one, Brian?
I have. Yeah, I finally watched it a couple of years ago. I liked it. I probably need to rewatch it again. Yeah. It's one of those where it's like, I'm not sure how I feel about the first time, but yeah, I would definitely be interested to see it again.
But it's definitely an acquired taste. And a lot of people think acquired taste means, smart people like it. No.
Yeah.
Acquired taste means maybe it takes you a little while. Maybe you won't pick it up. Maybe you will.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. But yeah, May. Let's talk about May.
Okay, so May is about a veterinary assistant who has a lazy eye. And she has been socially awkward her entire life. And we see her as she is trying to come out of her shell and come to know other people. We've got a potential boyfriend in Jeremy Sisto. We've got an assistant. We've got a secretary that works where she works, played by Anna Faris, who I completely forgot was in this movie because I hadn't seen it in about 20 years.
Yeah, a movie has a great cast.
It has an amazing cast, and it's all anchored by, I think, a just tremendous performance by Angela Bettis as May.
Yeah, I mean, then Nicole Hiltz, James Duval. There's lots of really good people in this movie, but Angela Bettis is, I mean, heartbreaking is one thing because it's it's not difficult for a good actor to make you feel empathy and sympathy for a girl that people are laughing at. That's not that difficult. Everything she does in this film is impressive, that you can make this character this weird and still the audience feels very warmly towards her. And, even though she is fractured and often does things that are what we would now describe as cringe, we empathize with her because we've all been there. We've all been that awkward person at the party who doesn't know anybody. We've all been that person who thought they were being asked out on a date but weren't, or thought you had a chance with this girl or guy but you didn't for some reason. I mean, we've all had those awkward, awful moments. And I think this movie is a brilliant combination of the misfit strikes back, kind of anti-bullying story that was so prevalent in the 80s. But I also think, even more interestingly, it is the 2000s version of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
I mean, she Frankenstein wanted to build a monster for hubris, to prove that he could, to prove that he was brilliant. May wants to build a friend because she wants a friend.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's heartbreaking.
Well, and a big part of the reason it's heartbreaking, and in a way, this kind of ties it into Frailty because of the fact that we see early on May's mother basically, she tries to get May to, be socially acceptable, I guess, by trying to take attention away from the lazy eye.
She's just being conformist. That's it.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's that idea of don't acknowledge your difference. Don't acknowledge, like pretend you're completely normal as every other person, and just, but I mean, just telling a kid to just ignore something that is as plain as day, not really all that realistic.
Oh no. And the thing is, it's like, instead of trying to help her daughter, interact more with people on her own terms, what she does is she basically gives her this doll that she had that the mother had as a kid, and like, this is your first friend. And it's like, if you can't necessarily make a friend, you kind of build it, is sort of this idea that, and I made this, and it's like, that's what you kind of need to do. And so by the time she's an adult, she is stunted emotionally, socially, and to the point where it's like she feels like the only way she can live is with this doll. And basically that's who she is for most of her life. And so when she tries to get into when she tries to interact with people, it just comes out wrong. And
yeah, it is a lot to do with, I mean, and it's a lot of things. I think it's Frankenstein. I think it's Carrie. I think it's a slasher movie. But it's also a very simple statement of raise your kids right, especially if they're a little bit different.
Yeah.
Not telling you what right is, but it's certainly the way May was raised was not conducive to good health. So I think like the film has a strong moral standpoint of,
No, you're fine.
my phone rang and I just wanted to ignore it, but then I looked down at it and lost my train of thought.
No, it's all right.
And it wasn't, and the funny thing was, it was a campaign call. The governor, the guy running for governor, calling me on a Saturday night while I'm podcasting.
Good Lord.
Did you know Lionsgate paid for May, cost $1.7 million, probably cost less than that, but it didn't even crack 700,000 at the box office. This movie was dumped unceremoniously by whoever was in charge at Lionsgate at the time. I happened to be, luckily, in Austin at South by Southwest at the time it was playing. It wasn't playing as part of the festival, but it was playing in 2 or 3 theaters in Austin. I don't know if this is 100% accurate, but I have read in the past that Lionsgate opened this film in Austin and Fresno. That's it.
Good.
That's it. It could be possible people have seen it elsewhere. So, but they dumped it. They just treated it like garbage. And the irony is, it would have done somewhat better than it did had they supported it. And it has now gone on to become a bona fide modern cult film. Like,
oh yeah,
you mentioned this movie on Twitter and people go nuts. They love it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to remember. I want to say it played in Atlanta, but I can't remember if it did or not. But I know I definitely didn't get to this one until DVD. And then I actually got a chance to meet Lucky McKee at Dragon Con a few years ago, and that's how I got my copy. He had his table. So so this was the first time since 2003 I'd seen it. It flattened me as much as it did the first time. This is again talking about, this has just, I'm first and foremost a soundtrack person. I'm a music person. I love the music in this. It's such a wonderful, sad score in this. The cinematography by Steven Yedlin. Wow. I mean, he's worked with Rian Johnson in the past few years, hasn't he? I mean,
they know each other for years. Ryan was one of the editors on this film. He's actually credited. And so is Chris Iverson, who's directed many interesting genre films, including Girl Next Door. Not Girl Next Door. I Know Who Killed Me. Chris Iverson did that one. And much better, The Lost he also made. Rian Johnson was one of the editors on this movie. And he also threw it. Here's a little tidbit for your listeners. If they don't know this, one of the characters in The Last Jedi is named Kennedy. He's the one of the evil generals who dies. One of the evil Sith.
Oh, wow. Sith.
And yeah, May Kennedy, and that's May's last name. Ryan. Yep.
Well, now I have to rewatch The Last Jedi. So
yeah.
Okay.
It's funny, yeah. He threw in a little May reference into The Last Jedi, and there. I hope I'm not talking out of turn, but Ryan Johnson, and Lucky McKee might be working on something together as we speak.
Oh my God, that would be awesome.
Maybe not as we speak because it's Saturday night, but they are working on something, and I wish I knew more, and I wish I could say more.
Yeah, excellent. The performances other than this, Jeremy Sisto is really good in this movie. He is. I love that he's able to. I mean, he's such a dick to her during the breakup, and I love the way he shoots the breakup and the quote unquote breakup. The way that May finds out that he doesn't want anything to do with her. It's just such a simple and just devastating shot. The way, because it's a scene that we've kind of seen a million times, a million different ways, but for some reason the way he does that in there, where it's so close yet so far, it's just such it's a devastating scene. But yeah, Sisto is terrific in this. Anna Faris is really entertaining. I can't believe I forgot she was in this. And this was right around the time of Scary Movie films, and where she was in kind of her peak popularity as far as film. So, I mean, it's disappointing that Lionsgate just basically dumped this movie out because of the fact that you would think that they would have been able to do something with this just by letting people know, oh, hey, Anna Faris is in this. So
yeah, I mean, at the time, I don't know if she would have been that big of a draw to anybody because it was like right around the first Scary Movie, I think, or a year before, maybe. I don't know, but yeah, it's a good point. She was a bigger star in this, and Jeremy Sisto had a run there where he was doing nonstop indie horror films, and he's really good because he has to be a dick for the audience to see he's a dick, but he also has to be somewhat appealing so we can kind of see what May sees in him. I just think the ultimate moral of this fascinating, multifaceted horror story is be kind to other people. That woman who lives down the street by herself, she might be completely happy with her life, and she might be miserable and sad. You don't know.
Yeah.
So, don't be cruel to people, especially people who may have some kind of an issue, mental, physical, emotional, that might make their life 5 degrees more difficult than yours. It's a simple message. Don't be a bully. Don't be cruel. I love that, even though it is a tragic and dark and sometimes darkly funny horror movie. Yeah. I saw it with two of my friends, Eric and Chris, two guys who were film critics, and we laughed frequently at this movie. Mm-hmm. When the sequence when she shows Sisto her student film.
Oh God, yeah.
And his reactions and her reactions, and it's like a tennis match of emotional reactions. Her watching him looking at her, like, wait, what am I watching here? And then they make out, and she bites him, and I love it. I think it's sometimes subtle, sometimes not subtle, and which is fine. But it's a great script, and I've seen all of Lucky McKee's films. I think he's a great filmmaker, and I still think May is, of course, his masterpiece. And he should. I don't care if he tops it or not. I will always like his movies.
Yeah, I mean, May is. I'm not unfortunately I'm not as familiar with his work as I should be. Rewatching this makes me realize, yeah, I'm probably going to go back and start to watch some of his stuff, some of his other stuff. You're right though. I mean that zombie film Jack and Jill she shows this, so is just really. It's such a twisted movie, but it's also really funny to watch. But I mean, the thing is, it's like even when even when this film gets violent at times, there's such sympathy because it feels like everything is just out of a matter of the fact that she cannot make anything work in the
Right.
real
And she
world.
does, thanks to her mom, she has no idea how to communicate. You know, it's not just a movie about like bad parenting equals evil. Like we know that, and the
Yeah.
movie's a lot deeper than just that. But that's also a theme that like the mother was more concerned about, you know, outward appearances than inner peace.
Yeah.
You know, inner, you know, teaching her daughter it's okay to be different.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like she instilled in her, different is bad. No matter what it is, different is bad, and it's not.
Yeah, and I'm not going to give away the final shot just to say
Oh.
it's one of the most it's beautiful and it's haunting, and it really is it ends this movie on such a note that you're unsettled because of how it got there, but you also it really kind of ramps up the sympathy for May because of what it means. And it's really there's so much about that is just absolutely amazing. And this really is a masterpiece. I mean, that word gets used.
The ending is a gut punch, and
Yeah.
you could see both like the studio happy ending. You could see like the screenwriter's slightly happier ending. You could see the much darker ending. You could see like the 5 different ways that you could end this movie, and I honestly think that this is the best way. It is.
Yeah.
It's poignant and tragic, but it also is like satisfying, like closing a good book.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
And by the way, if like you said, you're not that familiar with Lucky McKee's movie, I like all his stuff, but watch The Woman first from 2011.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Excellent.
That's probably his second best, in my opinion.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely start with that one. I believe May actually just hit Shudder. So, if I remember correctly, so
I believe it's also on Tubi. But yeah, I mean, anybody listening to Shudder is wonderful service, good bargain, love it. You know, and I only mention that because a lot of the services aren't. Obviously, I do not work for Shudder, but when you're looking at the ones that you have to cut, you're like, oh, that one's $14.99 a month. That one's $12.99 a month. Shudder's still under $10 a month, and you know, if you like horror movies, it pays for itself over and over and over.
Yeah, and they always have a good stream of always have a good stream of genre stuff. And I mean, just this year alone, they add that Phil Tippett movie, Mad God, on there, which was just staggering. And then one that I love from Sundance, Speak No Evil, just hit last month, which is just disturbing, but I can't get it out of my head.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Shudder. They, you know, I know Sam Zimmerman, who is like the head curator there, and that dude knows his old school horror, and they're also really good at acquiring international and indie stuff. I'm proud to say that Found Footage 3D, a movie I produced, was one of the first Shudder originals back in the day. And you know, if anybody wants to check out Found Footage 3D on Shudder, I produced that with my good friend Steven DeGennaro, and it's a comedic riff on found footage movies, but we also both like found footage movies, so it's kind of an affectionate riff on that. Yeah, that's a lot of fun. I had a good time making that.
Yeah, I actually found that on Blu-ray a few years ago and picked it up, and I really enjoyed it. It was such a fun movie to watch.
I'll tell Steven, thank you. That was his baby. He hired me to play myself in the movie, and then I threw on a bunch of hats, and I was helping to promote it, and I was helping to push it at festivals. And out of nowhere, him and his producer, Charles, said, you've done so much beyond just playing yourself for 2 days. We want to make you a producer. And I went, oh, yeah, that sounds great. And then I, really started working my ass off to get that movie into the horror realm. I just wanted it to get a good home. And Shudder is a good home for Found Footage 3D.
Yeah, I mean, even if there are sometimes where found footage kind of grates on you, I get it. I mean, some parts of that genre are, a bit, they're not always a bit easy to take. But I mean, found footage, I like that it's kind of send up, but it's also a really good version of it.
Thank you. That's a compliment to Steven. That's what he wanted. He wanted it to be both a satire, but also a legitimately creepy movie.
Yeah.
So that's all a compliment to him. Steven wrote it and rewrote it so that it had good chemistry among the cast, legitimate humor, and then hopefully some good scares.
Before we wrap up, and I really appreciate you making the time to do this. I've really enjoyed this discussion. What are some recent horror movies that you feel like people should check out if they haven't already?
Barbarian is in theaters now. Whether you see it there or see it at home when it comes out, it's a lot of fun. There's an excellent comedic horror film, not even comedic, I wouldn't say horror. It's got monsters, but comedic monster movie called Slashback hits Shudder next week. And it's about a bunch of kids in Alaska fighting back against an alien invasion. And that's a lot of fun. What else have I seen lately? Bodies, real good.
Yeah.
A smart reaction. I was going to say reaction to slasher movies, but it's not that. It's just a smart version. I've seen hundreds of slasher movies. Not many of them are smart. This one has a brain. Idris Elba in Beast. That's fun.
Yeah.
Just defending his two daughters from a lion out in the jungle. It's really fun. Prey, phenomenal.
Yeah.
Have you seen Prey on Hulu?
Oh yeah.
It's the Predator prequel.
Mm-hmm.
Resurrection with Rebecca Hall. I believe that's also hitting Shudder.
Yeah, that's hitting Shudder later this month, I think.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I saw that one. I saw that one at Sundance. The third act really threw me, but oh my God, if you see it for no other reason, see it for Rebecca Hall. It's still one of the best performances I've seen this year. It is phenomenal.
She's always good. She can do literally anything.
Yeah.
But she's really amazing at playing someone slowly terrorized by something in an artsy horror film.
And Tim Roth and Tim Roth is fantastic in that movie.
It's her movie, but boy, does he try to steal parts of it. He is amazing. Monstrous. I'll throw in a plug for a movie that was not bad. With Christina Ricci. I kind of liked it.
Okay. All right.
And what was the one? Glorious. Also on Shudder. A comedic Lovecraftian monster movie directed by my old friend Rebecca McKendry, and I want to plug that. So there you go.
Okay, excellent. There's certainly plenty to check out as we go through the month of October, and really just any time, because to a certain extent there's no wrong time for horror. Scott, where can people find you? Where can people find your stuff? And what are you working on right now?
You can find me on Twitter, Scott E. Movie Nerd. It used to be just my name, Scott E. Weinberg, but I changed it because I didn't want to be verified anymore. So I changed it to Scott E. Movie Nerd. And now you can, if you go there, you'll get all the plugs to everything I do. But I run a Patreon-only podcast called Overhated, which is, as you know, you'll be on it soon. It is a show about movies that have been unjustly dismissed, disregarded, hated, or trashed. It started as a podcast like to defend Catwoman and Battlefield Earth and find some good moments of those bad movies. But it's expanded to include movies that have been like overlooked or unfairly dismissed. Our most recent episode, I have The Manchurian Candidate, the Jonathan Demme remake from 2004. And I discussed that with Rodney Asher, the director of the fantastic Room 237, which as a Shining fan, I'm sure you've seen.
Oh yeah, definitely. And he also did the Glitch in the Matrix last year, which I was a big fan of as well. Yeah, I mean, it's well worth subscribing to Patreon to listen to that podcast. It's really interesting. He always has really interesting conversations and really puts a lot of these movies in a very different light. And I need to figure out what I really want to talk about on there in order to, because there are a lot of movies where it's like, yeah, I do really like the movies, and it's like, you know, which ones do I want to talk about? I mean, there's so many that are really kind of interesting, but yeah, I mean, I definitely it's a pleasure to have you on here, Scott, to talk about horror, to talk about these movies, which are absolutely fantastic. And thank you very much for your time tonight.
You are very welcome. Thank you for the invite. You just said, let's talk underrated horror. And I threw out my 4 standards and you went perfect. And then 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, here we are. So, thanks again for the invite, Brian. Really good chat, man.
I'd like to thank Scott for joining me on the podcast. I was a huge fan of A's All Over. As you know, I've talked about it here a few times. I also was a big fan of Science versus Fiction, and Overhated is a really entertaining podcast, and I do hope you check it out, and I do plan on being on there sometime in the future. I just have to figure out what movie I want to talk about. That's going to be it for this episode of the Sonic Cinema Podcast. Be sure to check out those movies that Scott and I were talking about, as well as the ones that he recommended. There were some great ones in there. Again, you can check us out at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. I will have some info on my original score for Player PhD, which will be coming out here soon. And then we've got one more horror podcast, and it's going to be a joy. Phil Fasso's going to join us again, and we're talking 1982 horror. You can probably guess some of the ones that we're going to talk about. In fact, we mentioned a couple of them tonight. Thank you very much for listening. This is Brian Scuttle, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you.